What's going on, football fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and prop preview for Thursday night football between the Cardinals and the Seahawks. Gonna get you guys ready for all of your exposure. But first off, a look at the DFS side and how I'm building my single game lineups. That'll include some strategy, some game scripting for tomorrow night, as well as some ownership and how to build your lineup. So hopefully we can get this week started off with a bang. And then afterwards, we're gonna focus on the pick'em and the prop side with our Underdog and Prize Picks props that I've already entered to this point, as well as a few Hard Rock bet spots that you might want to consider adding as well. So by the end, you'll have a complete game plan for all of your exposure on Thursday, and with a lot to go through here, it's not wasting any time at all. Start off with, first off, look at the DFS side and how I'm handling those DraftKings lineups. Before we start going player by player, let's mention the kind of script that we've got for Thursday, which is a low implied total, only 43.5 points in most of those major books, and only 1.5 points favoring the Seahawks. So you're not going to see one type of game script really dominate the rest. That usually happens when we get over 3.5 point spread favoring one team. You'll see a lot of 4-2s, maybe 5-1s favoring the favorites in that kind of scenario. But with close to a pick'em like we have for Thursday, you're not going to see that same kind of conviction. And usually the case in those kind of scenarios is you'll see a lot of 3-3s, maybe a 4-2 towards one of the two teams, but you're not going to see an overly committed 4-2, or especially not a 5-1 in either direction. And what I mean by that is playing defenses, maybe running a running back from one of those two teams at the captain position, is people will go a little bit onto either side, but won't play for one of those outside game scripts. And considering that both of these teams aren't towards the top of the NFL in terms of standing, but not really Super Bowl contenders in either cases, we could easily see one of these two teams go out there and fall flat on their face, the other team go out there and play above their expectations and win by 3 to 4 touchdowns. It happens a lot more often than I think we realize in the NFL. A lot of these close games like you see on the spread don't actually end up working out that way. So if you're going to play the large field GPPs, try and get some differentiation to what the rest of the field is doing, just play an outside game script. And I don't see this being a big single entry or big cash slate for me, as it looks sloppy, it looks a bit unpredictable. But in those large field GPPs, when we get that kind of variance and something that's hard to go out there and narrow down, that's perfect for those sort of formats where we've got to beat 50 to 10,000 or 100,000 other people. When you've got that many other entries to play against, you want to embrace that chaos and embrace some of those outside outcomes. So that's what I'm going to be doing for Thursday. Going to really be playing in those large field contests instead and trying to correlate some 4-2s and some 5-1s. So it started off with Jackson Smith and Jigba at the top end of the board. He's 11 grand, but still at about 2x points per dollar value. So you could say that even though he is the most expensive player on the slate, he's probably the best spend up that we have at the same time. So not a surprise that he's 65% combined ownership between the flex and the captain spot. And I would say he's usable at both flex and captain. In fact, you can see towards the right side, I plan on using him in both of those kind of spots. But if I'm going to be correlating my lineups in a 4-2 or 5-1 direction, that means that if I'm using him in either spot, really, he's $11,000, it's probably going to be with a Seahawks-led stack, because if we're going with a lot of Cardinals players trying to stack that side up as our 4-2 or 5-1, it's going to be very rare that we have enough salary, whether it's at flex or, of course, the $16,500 at captain, to be able to spend up for that sort of an option. So I think he's a no-brainer. If you can afford to use him, you probably should be for your Thursday night lineups, but the price tag is going to be there at nearly $17,000 at captain. Next up, we got Kyler Murray at $10,800. He does have rushing upside, so unlike some of the other quarterbacks that we talk about for Showdown, you don't have to have a pass-catching option along with him, but even like Lamar Jackson or some of the more heavy rushing quarterbacks that we have in the NFL, you don't always have to go without them, right? The naked quarterback play is a little bit more viable for large field GPPs for main slate, where we've got 12 to 13 games to choose from. When we're only talking about a single game, we've only got so many skill position players to really go around. If Kyler Murray is going to score 15 to 20 plus fantasy points, which is what he's got to get to the optimal lineup, he's probably bringing along at least one pass catcher with him. So a majority of my lineups that are using Kyler on Thursday will have at least one wide receiver or tight end along with him. Next up, we got Kenneth Walker III, who is extremely expensive for the kind of role that he's going to have. If you guys didn't see the news, Zach Charbonnet is going to be good for Thursday night football. No longer has a questionable tag attached to his name. So while if Charbonnet was out, $10,400 would make a lot more sense. With him back into the mix, this is a far overpriced player. In fact, in terms of points per dollar value, he's only at 1.1x compared to 1.7x plus for all the players around him. So if you're playing in cash or in single entry contest, I would not touch Kenneth Walker with a 10-foot pole. However, if you're in the large field GPPs like I'm going to be, there's absolute gold to a low-owned player like this. He's only 19% at flex, only 2.6% at the captain position. And while it's still an outside outcome for him to get to the 20 plus points that he likely needs to make it to the optimal lineup, it's certainly not impossible if the Seahawks are playing from ahead, because if they're playing from ahead, he's going to get extra usage as the more bruising running back. He could fall into the end zone once or twice. That's another way for him to make the optimal lineup. And because my exposure is almost primarily going to be in those large field GPPs, there's a very good chance that he finds himself into my player pool. And I made this mistake on our Monday night exposure. I said that the Lions, right, were viable underdogs. I was going to play some 4-2s. The only reason I didn't take down GPPs on Monday is because I did not play David Montgomery. And I even mentioned on the live stream, on the video on Monday, that I probably needed to add him to my exposure. I will not be making that mistake this week. I will be adding Kenneth Walker to my exposure, even if it's just matching the field or going slightly under on it. Because if I had done so for the last slate that we had, I had all the other players needed to take down that large field GPP. So, you learn from your mistakes, you see where things went wrong in the past. And that's not to say that Kenneth Walker is going to get there in, a 4-2 or a 5-1 Seahawks stack. But if that kind of game script comes through, I at least want to have some of that exposure to account for it. Next up, I got a Sam Darnold at $10,000. I would say he's a little bit overpriced, but he's been very efficient here in 2025. Somebody that I think is not getting the respect that he deserves for how good they have started to start this year. But 1.7x points per dollar value also isn't the worst that I've ever seen. It's not as good as a Trey McBride, a Trey Benson, who's at 1.9x points per dollar value, but you can't ever sleep on these quarterbacks in the showdown format. The one thing I'll say, though, with Sam Darnold is that he doesn't have nearly as much rushing upside as, let's say, a Kyler Murray does. So unlike a Kyler Murray lineup where I could conceivably have him in a naked kind of format, it's not going to happen with Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold's the kind of quarterback that I will be playing at least one pass catching option in every single case, and if not 2+ if I were to use him at the captain spot, which as of right now, you can see I don't plan on using him at that captain spot, but these are not finalized. Like I was saying with Kenneth Walker, I may as well just do it now, in fact. Let's add the yes while we're on here so we don't forget about it. There will be some changes as the week goes on. And just to remind you guys, for all of those updates as the week goes on, make sure to check out my Patreon page to download these. I've got all my up-to-date projections on there, all my player pool stuff, all the stack notes and player pool notes that you see to the right as well. It includes my core plays, the players I'm using in single entries or cash formats. Also a lot of extra info on the slate, giving you all the nitty gritty and all the info you need on some of the players towards the bottom end of the board to have yourself a slate. So for all of that, check out the Patreon page. Again, link down below to check it out. NFL DFS tier is how you get access to all of these. Maybe my favorite play on the slate, though, is a Trey McBride. And whether it's at captain, whether it's at flex, the matchup is ideal for this week. And if you take a look at Seattle's defense, they're number 32 in terms of fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends, and they're number 31 in all the other metrics, whether it's receptions allowed per games, whether it's receiving yards allowed per game. So they're allowing over a touchdown per game as well over the first 3 weeks. Trey McBride is in for a big one, and it's not just the matchup. He's also probably the most talented tight end that we have in the NFL, especially when it comes to being that receiving tight end aspect. And now they don't have James Conner, so that third down back that they relied on to get those short yardage situations, now he doesn't have that. You got Trey Benson. He's going to be that running back one for Arizona, but when they're passing on third downs, the safety blanket's going to be McBride. He's by far their best offensive player. He's a far better player than even Kyler Murray is himself. So I think when they get to those 3rd and 4s, those 3rd and 3s, and sometimes where they would have run the ball in the past, I think you're going to see a lot more Trey McBride this week. Part of it's the matchup, part of it's the fact that he's just their best player that they have on offense now. And though he's $9,800, a bit expensive, he's a better points per dollar value than Sam Darnold. And normally these quarterbacks are some of the quote-unquote safest plays that we have on the slate. You could argue that Trey McBride or Trey Benson are actually the safer plays in this scenario. So I like them there at that sort of price tag. I love them at the captain spot as well. And I don't really have that much negative to say about Trey Benson here, other than that the Seattle defense is a really good matchup. But at $8,800, you should be getting almost all the running back usage for Arizona. You're going to get a few of the backups that start to mix in a bit, like a DeMarcado is probably going to get some touches for them. Maybe a Zonovan Knight down here, he's $200 himself. But 75 to 80% of that usage at the position is going to be Benson's to be had. So even though it's not an ideal matchup like it is for Trey McBride, you can't ever completely exclude him. And he's got a 1.9x points per dollar value on him as well. So even despite the matchup not being ideal, he's still one of the best plays that we have in this range. I'm not quite sure I'm going to use him at captain, though. I guess if I'm running some 4-2 or 5-1 Cardinals lineups, I probably should have some Trey Benson captain exposure. It's the same thing as this Walker here. And I might even have to have some Walker captain lineups too. If they're playing from ahead and they're trying to bleed out the clock, that's going to give him the kind of usage that we're hoping for. Now, he's got Charbonnet to deal with. The price tag is a lot more prohibitive there, but not so much with the Trey Benson. And in fact, so I don't forget about that one either. Let's go ahead and just add him at the captain spot, because if you are running at a 4-2 or a 5-1 Cardinals lineup and they're getting that kind of usage, you don't have the same kind of worries as a Charbonnet taking away that 50%. Next up, we got a Marvin Harrison Jr. at $7,800. People love the dog on him because of some of the drops that he's had to start the season, and I guess deservingly so, given how highly he was drafted, but he's still at least getting those targets down the field. He's still at least dropping the balls, right? That could be 50 to 60-yard touchdowns. If he catches them, you're going to have them for the showdown kind of format. So I think the points per dollar value is exactly where it should be, 1.5x. He's got an extremely low floor because he's not that PPR kind of wide receiver that most of us are looking for as a wide receiver one. However, he does have the yak ability. He does have those downfield high ADOT targets that could translate to a big game for showdown. So he, in my opinion, is much more of a GPP play. So I have him down as a yes right now. I think I'm going to change it to a yes in GPPs just because he's a bit more risky. That low floor doesn't make him the best single entry play, or in cash formats where you only have to beat about 50% of the field, or in cash or single entry, should say like 30% of the field to go out there and get into the money. But when you're trying to get that 15 to 20 plus point performance that can get you there in the large field GPPs, he's got the upside to get to that kind of performance. And you got a Cooper Kupp here next. He's more of the PPR sort of wide receiver, similar median projection, but Cooper Kupp has a much higher floor than a Marvin Harrison Jr. So if I was looking for more of the quote unquote safe play between these two, Kupp would be the option that I would go to first. But Marvin Harrison Jr. for the large field GPPs, which is where a majority of my exposure is going to be for tomorrow, he's the player that I prefer to get to there. So kind of shows you the difference in strategy and what you're looking for depending on the contest that you're entering. Always something that you should have in the back of your mind when you're not only building a player pool, but also when you're choosing what contest to enter. We've also got a Torrey Horn here next. He's at $5,800. I got to see him against the Steelers, and he burned us multiple times for big plays. This is somebody that I think by the end of the year that everyone's going to know about. He's got really good yak ability. He's the returner for Seattle, showing that sort of ability. Rookie wide receiver that was making some sideline catches too. So I think he's just a lot better than most people gave him credit for. Probably should have been drafted a lot higher than he was as well. And early in the year, he's not getting the kind of attention you'd think. So I've only got him at about 17% at the flex spot. I'll use him in 35 to 40%, get my leverage there for sure. But he is an extremely low floor player. He's the kind of guy that relies on the big touchdown, 30, 40-yard catch to make it to the optimal lineup. But because of that talent and what I saw, especially a few weeks ago against the Steelers, I think he's got a chance to be able to pull that off. Next up, we got Charbonnet at $5,400. He has completely shed the questionable tag, so he should be good to go for Thursday. If he plays and he gets close to the 50% share at running back like he has the first couple weeks, then that is massive at $5,400. He is the best value in terms of running back that we have towards the middle of the board. And though he's getting some ownership at about 33%, it's not the worst ownership number I've ever seen. I mean, sometimes the value plays on a showdown slate like this can be 40 to 50% owned, and it's still a bit early. We'll have to see what he looks like when we start getting closer to Thursday and lock with that ownership number. But anything sub 40% combined, and I'll still be willing to use him in my lineups. Maybe not at a full 2x leverage where I'm using him in 50 to 60% of my builds, but using him in close to 45 to 50% feels like a pretty good number for Thursday. Next up, we have these two kickers. You got a Myers at $5,000, a Chad Ryland at $4,800. These kickers continue to be underpriced all of 2025. I think that on average, they should be about $5,500 to even $6,000. And the ownership is starting to come along on them. I mean, we've been tracking this almost every single slate. But until they're $55,000 to $6,000 and 25 to 30% owned, there is going to be value on taking these kickers. So I'll be using them in about 30, 35% of my lineups. And I do prefer the ones that are on the favorites, but because this is a 1.5 point spread, close to a pick 'em with that money line, I think a Myers or Chad Ryland are both extremely usable for this slate. And now for the defenses who aren't sexy plays, both of them going to be sub 20% combined ownership, but are great if you're trying to get some differentiation because we've got ourselves that close pick'em spread. Not a lot of people are really expecting to use a lot of defenses / special teams. If you go with a 4-2 or a 5-1 though, it's a no-brainer to throw in these defenses. And in particular, if you're using one of the running backs at captain, whether it's a Trey Benson, maybe a Kenneth Walker or a Charbonnet at the captain position, just correlate them with the defense. They're going to be, holding the ball, trying to kind of run out that clock. That that not only correlates with the running backs getting extra usage, but also keeping the other offense off of the field. And if they're playing from so far ahead, maybe it's the defense that scores a touchdown that gets them into that scenario, or a bunch of turnovers that's giving the offense the ball in prime position. That's where you get the correlation between those players and then the running back on the other side. So you can see both of them are in my player pool in GPPs now. I actually just added them live as I did that cut here on the video because they make too much sense to use in those large field GPP lineups. And, kind of like I did with that running back before, adding Kenneth Walker in there, you've got to start thinking about some of these outside game scripts, in particular if you're playing at the big $5 or $25 GPP. So two guys that I had to get in there to the player pool, and I'm certainly going to be using in some of those outside game scripts. Next up, we got Amari DiMercado. He's going to play some snaps for Arizona, in particular with James Conner rolled out, but at $3,800, just really not that much value to be had there. To pay off this kind of price tag, he's going to have to score a touchdown, and I do think that Benson is going to be the running back they use a lot more often when they get down there. Michael Wilson, though, is a lot more intriguing when it comes to value. You do have Zay Jones that's already been rolled out for Arizona, so Michael Wilson or Greg Dortch will also see some snaps for them at that position. Dortch, more of a returner, more of that slot wide receiver. Michael Wilson's probably going to play 50 to 75% of the snaps. So at $3,400, he has a much easier way to get to the optimal lineup as opposed to a DiMercado that's probably going to be touchdown or bust for that kind of a slate. A Greg Dortch, worth noting that because of his receiving upside and the fact that he's the returner, you could correlate him with using it with the Cardinals defense, because if he does get you that return touchdown, he would get those 6 points as along with that defense/special teams getting credit for that too. So if that happens, you want to have both of those together if possible. And AJ Barner is going to play a lot of snaps for Seattle. He's their main tight end out there, but they also do have an Elijah Arroyo who mixes in as well. However, he's questionable at this point, so if Arroyo were to be rolled out, that would give a slight boost to Barner, but as is, I am expecting both of them to be playing. Both usable, and I'd say especially Arroyo because he's only $800 as opposed to $2,800 for a Barner. You got to tip Ryman, not expecting him to play a ton, especially with how good McBride is as their number one tight end. And Elijah Higgins would be another tight end that could also see some snaps for Arizona. Jake Bobo used to see a lot more snaps for Arizona last year, but with how solid Horton has looked to start this year, not expected to see a whole bunch of snaps outside of maybe wide receiver 3 snaps with one of the top guys are resting. And then you've got Zonovan Knight as well. We mentioned him a little bit earlier when you have the running back injury for James Conner, but he's running back 3 for Arizona. So realistically, I think your value down low are guys like an Arroyo that you could potentially use, a Barner, a Dortch, a Wilson who has that Jones injury kind of opening it up. It's worth noting that Robbie Oots, this isn't somebody that I would really want to use in my fantasy lineups. He is the fullback for Seattle, but he's such a good blocking fullback that if they don't have him, if he ends up being rolled out for Thursday, it's not so much a big deal with whether he's playable or not, but it's more so your Zach Charbonnets, your Kenneth Walker IIIs when they get into the red zone. If he's out, they're going to have a much harder time punching the ball in. So just a few names to keep an eye on. And with this slate, guys, when you have these close, low total games between two teams that aren't that good, just embrace the chaos. Embrace those outside outcomes. Cardinals might kick some ass. Seattle might kick some ass. And if either of them do, I'm going to have lineups built for that kind of scenario. And now for the pick'em and the prop side of things, where we've got a few props that I've already entered that you might want to keep an eye on for yourself. And the first thing we're going to go through would be this Kenneth Walker under on touchdowns. So it's at 0.5 on Underdog and Prize Picks. He's minus 135 for his under on a two-way market like Pinnacle. And what I like here is Zach Charbonnet coming back. You've got two running backs that see close to equal usage for Seattle when they're both healthy. Weeks 1 and 2, that's exactly what you saw. In fact, week 1, it was more so the Charbonnet show than the Kenneth Walker show. So week 2, when it flipped the other way, when Kenneth Walker was the number one running back, that was a bit surprising for some. I think we're going to see that at times this year, one of the two running backs getting slightly more usage, but even when that's the case, it's a 60 to 40 split. The other running back is getting a whole bunch of the usage, and considering that Charbonnet is a big-bodied running back, a guy that when they get down to within the 5 to 10 yard line is going to see some of those goal line snaps, him being back really matters. And what you saw for Kenneth Walker III on a lot of the sports books is that he was close to plus 105 to plus 110 to score. That's in the one-way market without the ability to take the under. So that's why when we get the two-way markets on a site like DraftKings or FanDuel that has him at that plus 110, I actually think he's going to be more than minus 130 towards the under, because if he's at the plus 110, normally those plus 110s are minus 140, minus 150 for the under on a two-way market like that. So there's immense value on this sort of a spot, and I'm not quite sure the sports books have completely adjusted to Charbonnet being back yet, because his questionable tag went away without a whole lot of people in the news talking about it. Last week he scored multiple times. times, like that's slightly inflating this number as well. It would not surprise me if the time that when we get to lock on Thursday, if he's like plus 115 to score, if he's the minus 140, minus 145 for the under, even at that minus 130 juice on the only market that has that two-way market posted, there's a lot of value on this sort of a lean. So it's partially because I like the low total here. It's a low total game. I actually think it might go under that 43.5 point total as well. Two decent defenses, and that Cardinals front seven isn't one to sleep on. I mean, they've got some really big bodied defenders on that line. They've got some really good run stuffing linebackers as well, all of which makes me like the value on this under. So that's the first side of it. And this is not the exact slip I ended up taking. That was actually on the underdog side. I took that under on Kenneth Walker touchdowns and paired it up with this Trey Bunsen under on rushing touchdowns, which is no longer available because the line made absolutely no sense. So if we go over here to a site like Prize Picks, just to show you how much the line doesn't make sense, his touchdown line is a demon towards the over, right? So that means that it's juiced towards the under in books. If you go on a site like Pinnacle, he's like minus 130, minus 140 towards the under. In fact, his touchdown odds are almost the exact same as Kenneth Walker on these books. And while he is going to be the number one running back, he is on the team that is the underdog, though, as opposed to the favorites on the Seattle side of things. So if he's juiced under for his regular touchdown line, how the hell did we get this rushing touchdown line at even money? And just to show you guys this, we got this for a full 3x payout. There was not a multiplier on either one of these. And you can see Kenneth Walker does have a multiplier on Underdog now. So that's partially why this one without the multiplier on Prize Picks is still good to take, right? Because it's still at that 50-50 value, and on Underdog it's not. But Trey Benson under on rushing touchdowns, that's not rushing plus receiving like you have for the prop over here on Prize Picks. This is just rushing touchdowns. This is probably a minus 200 prop out there towards the under. So that was massive value that I was able to mix in over there on the underdog side. Those people on my Patreon page were able to grab that. So like you have with the DFS side, guys, if you want to join the Patreon page for the prop tier, you can find a link to that down in the description below as well. $15 a month will get you access to every single slip that I enter. But for the pairing that we're going to go with, we're going to take this over on Trey McBride receiving yards. And there isn't really correlation between these two. A lot of times I try and do that when we're going with some of these slips. This game is too sloppy. It's too close of a spread. It's pretty much a 50-50 pick 'em. So I don't really see like an obvious game script to go out there and play, but I do love the matchup on this. And if you guys saw the section for DFS earlier, you'll know that this defense on Seattle has been the worst against tight ends of any team in the league. They're either 31st or 32nd in the league in all the big categories, whether it's fantasy points allowed, receiving yards allowed, targets allowed per game, you name it. They are just horrendous against this position. Trey McBride's probably the most talented tight end, at least receiving tight end that we have in all the NFL. And without James Conner, they're going to use him a lot more, especially on third downs. I mentioned that during the fantasy section too. He's going to be the quote unquote like safety blanket for a player like Kyler Murray. So I took him at 63.5 yards. Now Underdog and Prize Picks, he's at 64.5. So is that a 1 yard difference? But I still think that's okay to take with that sort of a 1 yard difference. It should not make a big difference. At least hopefully, I'll knock on wood over here. Fingers crossed that you don't get screwed by a 0.5 or anything like that. But there's some solid value on that. And even at the 64.5, I was looking at that on Prize Picks and Underdog before I ended up taking a hard rock bet for the straight bet. Well, I got minus 115 odds on that, so close to the minus 110 that I would be hoping for in that. But he's at 66.5 on some of the books. Like DraftKings has him at 66.5. I believe FanDuel did have him at 64.5, but a lot of the other major spots that you can look at do have him 1 to 2 yards higher. So that's why even at this number, I still think it's worthy of playing. And even without the correlation, that would be the one thing it'd be nice to have between these two. I guess we could say that maybe Seattle gets a lead, right? And it's not Kenneth Walker that's scoring the touchdowns that gets them that lead. That's why it's a little bit sketchy here with this kind of game scripting, that maybe Arizona would have to throw the ball a little bit more. And Seattle are the favorites for this game. So I guess it's not out of reason to say that that kind of game script could come to fruition. But I think that's a stretch at the very best. So it's just two lines that have some inherent line value on them. Not always my ideal kind of script and kind of slip that I like entering on these pick'em sites. I prefer when we have the line value and that game script and correlation on top of it. But you're not always going to get what you want, right? Sometimes these games are just too close to call. Alrighty, guys, that is all I've got for the Thursday Night Football preview. Best of luck with everything that you guys are entering. Go ahead, smash that like button if you guys haven't already, and also subscribe to the channel so you guys don't miss any of the content to come. That'll include our main slate previews, our Monday Night Football football preview for this week, as well as all the content throughout the rest of the year. You won't want to miss any of that. Subscribing is how you can make sure you get notified when all my videos go live. Best of luck, as I was saying. I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top. Hopefully we can cash out on some of that prop exposure as well, add to the bankroll as well in what has been a solid 2025 so far. And make sure to check out the Patreon page if you guys haven't already for all the extra content that I do. And it includes all the up-to-date projections that you see throughout these videos. To download this sheet with everything that is up to that exact second, make sure you join the NFL DFS tier. And for all the prop and betting stuff I enter as soon as I'm entering it, make sure to check out the NFL prop tier. That's where you could have gone that Trey Benson under on rushing touchdowns that we showed there before, as well as every single piece of pick 'em exposure as I enter it. So that's where you can find all of that. Best of luck, as I was saying before, guys. Appreciate the support here, and I'll see you guys for the main slate preview later on this week.